First, we'll examine a brief introduction about the cultural and individual basics you may experience while in Japan. First, in Yamada's book, Why Americans and Japanese Misunderstand Each Other, she notes first and foremost that Japanese culture tends to be more interdependent, whereas American culture seems to be more independent. This means that Americans view things as the individual, self-improvement, self-actualization, these kind of things, whereas interdependent Japanese is more on bringing the group up around you. Secondly, Japanese people use different speaking styles based on their relationship to their conversational partner. For instance, you'd use much more formal types of speaking with your teacher or your boss than you would with your friend or family members. This basically breaks down to what they call the uchi versus soto, with uchi being kind of your group, your in-group friends, family, co-workers that are on the same level as you, whereas soto is people who are not in your group. If you're a student, this could include your teacher, the principal at your school. If you're working in a company, this could be your people you're talking to from other companies that you are doing business with. We'll see an example of this later. Lastly, from a cultural standpoint, Yamada talks about speaker talk versus listener talk. Speaker talk is generally more used by Americans and tends to be more direct, more clear-cut, less ambiguous way of speaking, whereas listener talk tends to be more used by Japanese people, which is more ambiguous, kind of more nuanced, definitely less direct, and this can cause a lot of confusions for foreigners, especially Americans, that go over to Japan, as many miscommunications can arise from this. From an individual standpoint, one thing you have to absolutely keep in mind is that you will stick out. You will look different. You will not speak with the same level of proficiency as everyone else around you. But that's okay, You can work around that and help, there are tools you can use to integrate yourself in a society based on your status as a foreigner. A study done by Moody in 2014 examined an American intern working in a Japanese company who kind of just, used humor to kind of shake off the weirdness of being a foreigner. By playing up his status as a foreigner and making humorous mistakes or anything like that, he was able to successfully, integrate himself into the workplace. Other than humor, what you can do, Japanese people tend to use a lot of set phrases in everyday conversation. So if you can memorize as many of these as possible and learn when to use them, it can help you greatly with the transition from just regular old foreigner to, someone who clearly knows what they're talking about and that kind of understands Japanese society more. And people will notice these things and kind of, see you a little bit differently, maybe as less of just a typical goofy foreigner. We'll start by looking at two examples, the first of which is similar to the previously described scenario of an American intern in a Japanese business. In this skit, an American intern is talking to his Japanese boss. Now, something you should know is in Japanese, a section manager is called a kacho, but as we'll see in the skit, the American says this slightly off, which results in some humorous results. 館長、ちょっと質問がありまして。
館長で？
申し訳ございませんでした。課長ですね。本当に間違えました。
大丈夫だよ。でも気をつけてね。じゃあとにかく質問をどうぞ。
As we can see, even a slight error in pronunciation can produce drastically different results from what you intended. However, as we also saw, the boss, kind of just laughed it off and figured, hey, he's a foreigner, he's going to make mistakes, and just told him to be careful. Things like this actually help you integrate in society because this humorous situation probably improved relations with your boss. As you probably noticed if you speak any Japanese, the American worker used very formal language with his Japanese boss. However, in this next skit, we'll see two students using similar dialogue in a much more casual fashion. This includes omitting words altogether, omitting grammar particles, just lots of omissions, just different types of conjugations that you wouldn't use with your boss. ねえ、松本、ちょっと質問。来週の科学の試験何日？
木曜日だよ。
As you saw, the communication used was much more abbreviated, lots of omissions, and this is something you can do as you get to know people better in Japan. Once you make friends, you'll probably start off with a little bit of polite language, but the better you get to know them, the more kind of conversations like this you'll be able to have.
First-hand experience. The rhythm of talk, also known as aizuchi. Aizuchi, or back-channeling, are cues that are used for listener feedback. Some of these cues in English include uh-huh, yeah, and right, according to Yamada. Overuse and underuse of back-channel cues in English can give a speaker the sense that the listener is not paying attention. Some phrases of aizuchi in Japanese are ano, and hai, according to Saft. Japanese speakers use back channels more than American speakers. This can lead to some frustration between the American speaker and Japanese speaker, especially in Japan. When the American speaker wants to get a point across, they think that Japanese speaker is just continuing to interrupt them. In the next clip, we will see the use of aizuchi between two speakers of English and how the overuse of aizuchi in English can come across as rude. But the use of back channels are more common amongst Japanese speakers, so try not to get too frustrated like the speaker in the next clip.
Oh my god, I have a story to tell you. Okay, today in class we were talking about grammar points, and one of the exercise question was about children, and we got to a topic where teacher asked if any of us like children, and Allison was the only one that said she likes children, and she actually accidentally said she only liked Chinese kids. Can you stop?
In the following clip, we will witness a situation that may be common for foreigners in Japan. The use of bowing can be a little confusing to understand. Here's an example of how even between friends, the use of bowing is important, so you shouldn't overdo it or underdo it.
Hey.
No.
Oh.
You don't have to do it. You can just spell yeah.
Okay.
Let's discuss polite forms of speech in Japanese. This can be particularly confusing to English native speakers because this requires the ability to understand implicit meanings. This refers to when the speaker says something along the lines of, "That sandwich looks so good," while they want you, the listener, to interpret this as, "Can I have a bite?" Don't get me wrong, English speakers use this in conversation as well. However, the general consensus is that you are sometimes perceived as rude if you don't come right out and say what you want or mean. In Japan, the opposite is true. As we look at different forms of Japanese politeness strategy to watch out for, we should first understand the goal of Japanese communication. The idea is to be as implicit as possible and to avoid using direct speech for the sake of group harmony. Leach argued that the purpose of various politeness strategies is to increase your optionality and to lower the level of directness in conversation. One of the best and most effective ways of doing this, according to Brown and Levinson's research, is basically the act of hinting in what they call the off-record strategy. In this way, the speaker is expected to use this method as a way of being implicit without stepping on any toes, especially as a way of saying something that could potentially offend someone in as careful a way as possible. English communication, on the other hand, is all about the speaker stating their opinion and expressing themselves in an explicit way. The argument Bloom-Kolke makes for English politeness strategy is that the message or speech act needs to be clear and direct if you hope to be polite in communication. In short, if you continue to be too indirect with your words in conversation, then it doesn't make you look very good, or worst case scenario, you are considered rude. Once you find yourself in Japan, some common forms that indirectness take in communication is through making requests or asking for favors and making refusals. Some examples of making a request could sound something like, "I was wondering if you could pass me the salt," compared to one simple example of an English speaker's request, "Pass the salt, please." An example of a refusal in Japanese conversation could go something like, "I'll get back to you about going to the mall," versus a simple English speaker's response, "I can't go to the mall, sorry." Let's look at some examples of these strategies. The first example I would like to illustrate is a typical request form. Ways to make a request in English and in Japanese differ, as we've previously discussed, and this example will hopefully help you interpret the hints and implicit meanings in conversation. In this example, A Japanese foreign exchange student named Aya and myself are studying. I need help with my Japanese homework and make a request in the following video.
These tests just keep getting harder.
Oh, is it Japanese?
Yeah, my test is tomorrow. Who knows if I'm ready?
Do your best.
Thank you. Well, so actually, I was wondering if you could help me with this part. I can't translate it properly.
Oh, is it kanji?
Yeah. Could you help me?
Yeah, sure.
Notice how I started with a potential grounder, hinting that I may need help with my homework just before I make a direct request. Direct methods, according to René Kobayashi 1999, were not found to be common in their research results among native English speakers. However, they are generally accepted as a polite way of making a request even today. In the next example, it's Aya's turn. Let's examine how a Japanese student uses polite speech forms to make a request.
This homework is so difficult. English is so hard.
I believe you.
Are you busy?
No, I'm just doing Japanese homework. Why?
Oh, never mind. I don't want to bother you.
No, it's okay. I can help. What's wrong?
Are you sure?
Yeah. I'll take a break.
I can't figure out this English grammar. Do you possibly have time?
Yeah. Let me see.
If you noticed, Aya took a bit longer to make her request and used more non-conventionally indirect methods. Also, I hope you noticed that Aya never once used the phrase, "Can you help?" but instead used implicit language and hints. In short, even though Japanese and English speakers communicate very differently, if you can remember some of these strategies and then utilize them during your time abroad, it may decrease the chance of miscommunication. To summarize, listener talk is very important, so keep this in mind during every conversation you may have. Another important factor is to memorize those key phrases which are sure not to lead you astray. And combined with bowing and aizuchi, you will find it easier to fit in and make conversation more fluid. When making requests, don't forget to use strategies such as back-channeling and hinting, and try your best to read the atmosphere and to interpret implicit responses. Lastly, don't be afraid to take advantage of your status as a foreigner. It's okay to mess up sometimes. Just be yourself while being respectful of the culture, and you'll be just fine.